Antonia, can you describe your role as manager of the producer offset scheme at the FFC for us?
My role initially is to implement the new producer offset into the FFC and get the information out to filmmakers in this transitional period. And then the role will turn into one that assesses projects as they come in for their eligibility and for their expenditure, which will entitle the applicants eventually to get the rebate available from the tax office.
Now, your background is in production. You've had a lot of experience in production. Briefly, just take us through some of the things that make this job so perfect for you and why you took it.
Well, for several years I've been involved with what used to be called the refundable film tax offset, which was mainly for foreign films of high budget coming to Australia and getting an offset there. And the government introduced the Australian Screen Production Incentive earlier this year in the budget in May 2007, introducing this new producer offset but putting it side by side with the pre-existing, now called location offset, and a new incentive called the PDV offset, which is for post-production in Australia, and then the producer offset. So all three offsets now sit under that ASPI heading, Australian Screen Production Incentive. The first two, the location offset and the PDV offset, are administered by DKITA, the Department of Communication, Information Technology and the Arts. And the third one, the producer offset, which is sort of the local offset, is administered by the FSC. Now, because I'd been on the board of the location offset since its incarnation, I had the knowledge of how the whole process worked. And in introducing this for Australia, it was fairly exclusive knowledge outside DKITA. And I was originally on that board because I had been working in some high-budget American films. I understood the process and what was in and out and what their requirements were that were different from Australian. And having that knowledge and having been a line producer and producer of film across the board, those two things came together kind of exclusively. There were very few people that work at the coalface or have worked at the coalface like I did and hope to do again, and knew how the rebate worked, the offset worked. And so those two came together. And to be perfectly honest, I was supposed, the following week after I started at the FSA, I was due to start a new big feature, and it got delayed. And so Brian Rosen just came and said, "This has just landed in our lap. Could you come in and help implement it?"
Because if you had said no, you weren't available, they would be in trouble.
Well, yes, although I don't like to say irreplaceable, but it was an easier, it was an easier, backing in to have that knowledge. I understood what was going on.
Well, bearing in mind that there was a lot of speculation about it from the announcement in the budget until the legislation was passed, can you take us through the three different aspects of the producer offset scheme, the feature film, documentary and television aspects?
Yes, I can. A feature film needs to meet a threshold of qualifying expenditure of $1 million. So anything under $1 million is unfortunately out of the scheme.
Is that $1 million total budget?
No, it's not total budget. It's qualifying expenditure. And it's easier to talk about what doesn't qualify than it is to talk about what does. And essentially, things that are excluded relate to the two ends of not making the film. Preparing your documents, going on trips to raise finance, getting all your finance together, all the legals involved in the financing leading up to when you get your cash flow and you start making a film. At that point, all your expenditure really starts to kick in. And at the other end, when you finish the film, it's in a completed form to be viewed by the public, and you've completed all your expenditure. Anything after that is considered excluded as well. So that really says financing, some insurances that the tax department consider to be attached to financing. At the end, promotion, marketing, distribution, and the payment of the payment of money from exploitation of the film. So things like if fees get deferred, if actors get residuals, none of that counts. So it's about physical expenditure, qualifying production expenditure, physical expenditure. Essentially, it's about goods and services provided in Australia. And that's kind of interesting because it's about in Australia, not by Australians necessarily. So you could bring an American actor in, you could bring a designer from England, and their work here is all qualifying. But the government introduced between the budget and the final legislation a really good extra thing, which I don't think any other country has done in their incentives, which is allowing Australian residents to during principal photography, to work overseas on an Australian film, and that money also counts. So that goes against the thing if it happens in Australia. But that was quite generous, but it was partly because they had embraced documentaries into the incentive, and it allowed, because so many of them are from an Australian perspective. So that's the extra thing that's been added. Australian residents, goods and services supplied by Australian residents overseas during principal photography are allowed.
So a film which has scene or scenes shot overseas, that is also included?
No, only the costs associated with Australian residents.
Okay,
yeah.
So local, the foreign elements like location fees in Paris, say, or cast paid in Paris are not covered. Okay,
that's right.
Okay.
Or Paris crew are not.
Okay. So with feature films with minimum 1 million expenditure on qualifying expenditure, no cap, no top limit.
No, it's open-ended. It can go to 100 million.
And of that amount, of that qualifying expenditure, 40% is rebated to the producer.
That's right.
Now, is it rebated to the production company or the producer?
It's the applicant, so that might be a production company. And the legislation talks about companies more than it talks about individuals. And you can then, you know how sometimes you set up a special purpose vehicle company to make a film? That would probably be the company that would be the applicant, and the money can only come back to the applicant. Right. Be it a person or a company, but it's more likely to be a company.
What sort of timing is, when the qualifying expenditure has been fully expended, is that the only time that the company can apply?
No, there's an optional provisional certificate, because there is a significant Australian content issue attached here, which is, to protect, where possible, Australian productions. And there's two parts to the provisional application form. The second part is, do I qualify? And if people are going to need to borrow from a financial institution to cover the gap in the finance while they wait for the rebate to come back, they are going to want some sort of confirmation that it does comply. And the qualifying Australian, obviously, is a crucial part of the legislation.
Is that on the same test as the 10BA qualifying?
Yeah, more or less.
More or less?
It doesn't. It's not mandatory to pay attention to source of finance or copyright. Those two things have less importance. But if at some stage there's any, it might be needed when looking at a project on case-by-case basis, if it's wavering near the edge of qualifying, what those situations are.
And but the actual rebate, the money coming back to the production company, is that all in one tranche at the end, or are there progressive?
No, at the end when they're finished.
When they're finished.
There's quite an onerous preparation period at the end, because you have to provide every penny you've spent and tell us whether it's QAPE or not QAPE, and we have assessors who will look at that and decide, this looks a bit dodgy, or it's not arm's length, or one of those things, and you can call for all that paperwork. So we're hoping the process might be 6 to 8 weeks after we receive the paperwork. Might be quicker. I'm sure a little documentary will get through much faster than a $20 million feature.
Right.
And I think most of what we're dealing with will be, it's what's happening, it's replacing FSC direct funding, and so 90% of it's going to be so Australian anyway, there'll be no doubt. about its authenticity.